السلام عليكم ورحمة
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح
أوكي.
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh. Sorry, there is a white Honda car. The alarm has been going off for about 10 minutes. So if you have a white Honda car, please just go check out your alarm. Jazakallah khair.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله. يقول الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وليضربن بخمرهن على جيوبهن. وقال تعالى في مقام آخر يا أيها النبي قل لأزواجك وبناتك ونساء المؤمنين يدنين عليهن من جلابيبهن. وقال تعالى في مقام آخر فإذا سألتموهن متاعا فاسألوهن من وراء حجاب. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, we praise Him, we seek His aid and we seek His guidance. We seek refuge in Allah from the evil within ourselves and from the evil within our sins. Those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has guided, none can misguide, and those whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has led us. And I bear witness that there is none worthy of worship except Allah. And I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His servant and messenger. My dear respected brothers and sisters, in honor of National Hijab Day, I've been asked to speak about this topic of hijab. And we have made this topic very difficult to speak about as a ummah. Oftentimes when this topic of hijab comes up, it's as if it is a taboo, especially coming from both sides, whether it be the brother's side or the sister's side. Brothers will say sisters need to do this, and the sisters will respond by saying, well, brothers have no room to talk about the hijab. When in reality, hijab is for both brothers and sisters. And this is something that we fail to realize as a Muslim. Now, subhanAllah, if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, before Allah even spoke about hijab, before Allah even spoke about the khimar, before Allah spoke about the jilbab, 15 years, the ayahs of hijab, the ayahs of khimar, the ayahs were revealed 15 years after the Prophet ﷺ received nubuwwah. Now we have to ask ourselves the question then, what was said before? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed ayat of salah. Allah revealed ayat of zakah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed ayat of siyam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke about many different issues before He even got of hijab. And so we have to ask ourselves the question as leaders of our community, as community members, whether it be both brothers or sisters, how have we introduced Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the community? How have we introduced the idea of salah to the community? As leaders of our household, men of our household, do we just order our children to wear hijab? Do we order our wives to wear hijab? Or have we slowly introduced them to who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is? Because if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, before he even began to talk about these things, he literally introduced Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the people. He literally taught the people. He introduced them to Allah. He taught them how to pray. He taught them on how to have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when you learn on how to have a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the issue of hijab becomes easy for both brothers and sisters. 4 years after the Prophet ﷺ conducted the hijrah, he gave da'wah in Mecca for 10 years, conducted the hijrah to Medina, was there for 4 years. Finally, the ayat of hijab have come down. And I say this for myself first and foremost, we've understood what even the word hijab means. There are different parts to it. The word hijab in the Quran was literally referenced to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ. What do I mean by this? When the ayah came down in Surah Al-Ahzab, فَإِذَا سَأَلْتُمُوهُنَّ مَتَاعًا فَاسْأَلُوهُنَّ مِنْ وَرَاءِ حِجَابٍ. When you go talk to the wives of the Prophet ﷺ, make sure you talk to them behind the hijab. Hijab literally means a barrier. But unfortunately nowadays we're so quick to throw it around. The sister needs to do this, the sister needs to do that, the brother needs to do this, the brother needs to do that. Very careful, because we literally have not even understood what this word means and what it is referenced to. Now when it comes to the actual head covering, Aisha radiallahu anha narrates that it was the 4th year after Al-Hijrah. And the Prophet ﷺ, the ayah came down in Surah An-Nur. And before even the ayah came down in Surah An-Nur regarding the hijab, Allah orders the men in regards to their hijab, the one we'd like to throw around today. He goes on by saying, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and say to the believing man, before he even addresses the women. If you're so quick to point the finger, as you point one finger, there are 3 fingers pointing back at you first. So come to understand, before you judge anybody, before you call out anybody, before you belittle anybody, before you try to bring anybody down, come to understand this and ask yourself the question, are you upholding this idea of hijab? Allah, before he even tells the believing woman, وَقُلْ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَغُضُّوا مِنْ أَبْصَارِهِمْ, tell the believing men their gaze. You have to ask yourself the question, especially in the society which we live in the time and era which we live in. We all have our phones, we all have social, it's so easy to allow your eyes to wander. It's so easy as you're scrolling through Instagram, as you're scrolling through TikTok, as you're scrolling through Snapchat, whatever vice you like to use when it comes to social media, ask yourselves the question, before you point the fingers at the sisters, are you genuinely lowering? Not only are you lowering your gaze, but وَيَحْفَظُوا فُرُوجَهُمْ, are you dressed in a modest manner? What does this mean? And I'm about to call out some men, and I mean this with the other. When is your backside showing? Are you the type that you wear shorts and your knees are showing and your outer is exposed, but you're so quick to call out the sister? These are questions you have to ask yourself. Because until you've corrected yourself, until you've corrected your household, until you've corrected the way you move in this dunya, when it comes to hijab, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered, you can't say nothing. And even if you've corrected yourself, come to understand this, we are not allowed to judge in Islam. If you see somebody not adhering to the hijab, the way that you've come to understand it, or the way that Allah, don't judge them, rather make dua for them. And not only make dua for them, but approach them in such a manner where you can, where they can appreciate the correction. Oftentimes when we try to correct each other when it comes to this idea of hijab, we're very upset. Why are you telling me this? What is any of your business between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is a sign of arrogance, not only a sign of arrogance, but as Muslims, we're supposed to do this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes on, you're the best nation sent to the people. Why? Because we remind the people, but we forbid evil to the best of the abilities. Not only that, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in the Quran, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً we've made you a just, correct one another, but in a respectful manner. Now, when it comes to the hijab for the sisters, say, وَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنْ. The khimar, this is in regards to the head cover. The khimar in reference to the Quran. And subhanAllah, keep in time, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the women of extreme prestige, the women of status, they used to walk around and they used to cover their head, but they didn't do it correctly. But they used to, once they cover, they throw it over their shoulders, meaning is exposed, right? Of the women of prestige at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Now Aisha radiallahu anha narrates, and Salama radiallahu anhuma narrate, she said when these ayat first came down, keep in mind the Prophet ﷺ already established their connection with Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ established their salah. He established their zakah. He established the idea of only jihad in the battlefield, but jihad the nafs, the internal struggle. Because when it comes to this idea of hijab, but it's another thing to have this internal struggle, and I feel for my sisters. When it's not an easy route to take. But Aisha radiallahu anha goes on by narrating, she says, when the Muhajirun and the Ansar first heard these khimar, they quickly right away began to tear down the curtains in their home, and they began to cover themselves in such a way where you could not even see them. And now we have the other extreme of it all. Right? Cover to an extent where you don't see nothing. This is one other opinion. Islam only reminds the sisters need to cover their head, their faces can be exposed, and their hand can be exposed. Just think about this for a moment. We establish the religion within the heart for them to accept these things. Oftentimes we force our sisters to put on the hijab without even subhanahu wa ta'ala, without teaching them right from wrong. We just expect them to do it because everybody else is doing it, or we expect them to do it because Allah said to do it, and that is one reality of it. But how have you nourished our sisters to prepare them for such a moment? You know, subhanAllah, Aisha radiallahu anha goes on by saying, she says, when this ayah of khimar came down, shortly after the jilbab came down, Ya ayyuhan nabiyyu, O messenger of Allah, قُلْ لِأَزْوَاجِكَ, say to your wives, وَبَنَاتِكَ, and your daughters, وَنِسَاءِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, and the believing women. If you're truly a person who believes in Allah, then you've come to understand that hijab is not an option. Hijab is not a choice. Hijab is an obligation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is something that we've misunderstood. Yes, as a human being, you might have the choice of free will. Allah blessed you with that. But come to understand, when the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are brought down, this is an obligation, you must do it. يُدْنِينَ عَلَيْهِنَّ مِنْ جَلَابِيبِهِنْ. The jilbab is the proper cover from the neck all the way down to the ankles or the feet, some scholars even say. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what have we understood from this? As men, do we cover modestly, excuse me? Because if we don't, we have no right to say anything about the sisters. And as sisters, if somebody comes to you and genuinely corrects you when it comes to this issue, don't take it personally. Don't get upset. Don't say it's my choice. Yes, it may be your choice, but come to understand we need to correct each other when it comes to these things. Aisha radiallahu anha was talking to her niece Hafsa radiallahu anha, and I want you to imagine this now. Hafsa radiallahu anha walks in after of jilbab and khimar have been revealed. And Hafsa radiallahu anha was not wearing the proper khimar, was not wearing the proper hijab. Her right? And Aisha radiallahu anha walks up to Hafsa, this is her niece. Right? She says, oh my dear beloved. She goes, the way you're dressed, subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked us to do. And Hafsa radiallahu anha's response wasn't, well, who are you to tell me? This is my choice. This is something that I picked to do. Her response was, please teach me on how I need to dress. Please teach me on how I need to act in accordance to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants me to move. These are questions we have to ask ourselves on how we take this topic. Are we and I've seen situations even when I approach brothers, and brothers are no better than the sisters sometimes, and I mean this with the utmost respect. We're so quick to not only look at a sister, but we're so quick when we're out with the brother, looking at a female, and we pass these nasty comments about the female. Now, brother, lower your gaze. Brother, correct yourself. Oh, why? This is all right. We can look. We're allowed to look once, and all these ridiculous mentalities that we've allowed ourselves to just accept as brothers. If you're corrected when it comes to this situation, don't take it personally. And come to understand this. Hijab is fard. And if you don't adhere to it, it's essentially a sin. Oftentimes we think it's not a sin, it's a sin. And what's even a greater sin is when we try to justify the sin. And oftentimes what I hear from the brother side, not only from the brother side, but from the sister side as well too, well, the time and age which we live in, it's very hard to adhere to hijab. The time it's very hard to practice. This may be the case, but come to understand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never ask you to do something which He knows you cannot handle. And if Allah knows that you can handle it, come to understand this, you need to have confidence in yourself. Not only have confidence in yourself, but come to understand that the more you try to practice, the more you implement, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make it easy for you. I want y'all to imagine this for a moment. Nusayba bint Ka'b. Nusayba bint Ka'b was the Sahabiya who when the battle of Uhud was taking place, she was literally defending the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So this idea of women needing to stay home, and this is wrong. Right? Imagine this. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, to such an extent, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was saying, I didn't know, like every time I looked somewhere, I would see Nusayba radiyallahu anha. That's how fast she was on the battlefield. Imagine this now. Now Nusayba bint Ka'b, after these ayat of khimar came down, after these ayat of jilbab came down, right? She told the Prophet ﷺ, she said some women don't even want to leave the house. Some women don't even want to come out. Some women don't even feel comfortable dressing this way. So the Prophet ﷺ told her very straightforward, allow them to come out, but tell them to dress properly. Not only that, but he took it a step further by reminding her, your hijab shouldn't be a disability or shouldn't hold in this dunya. These are women of Jannah. And it's not because they sat at home with their hijab on. No, they went out, they were productive members of society, but in accordance to the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked them to move. And this is how we need to empower our sisters. Not only empower our brothers as well too. Oftentimes it's very difficult for the sisters to wear the hijab simply because we haven't empowered them. Stay at home, don't talk to anybody, move like this, move like that. And ask the question, did the Prophet deal with his wives like this? Not only did he deal with his wives like this, but did he deal with his daughters in this manner? If these are women that fought on the battlefield, Aisha radiallahu anha, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with her, she was teaching the men ahadith. She was teaching the Sahabas right from wrong. We have to ask ourselves these questions. But is hijab something that culturally now to where they need to stay home? I need to do this, I need to do that, don't talk to anybody. This is why it's so important to study the deen. This is why it's so important to not only study the deen, but to our children, so that we not only have them to this, but become productive members of society. Hijab is not only an object which we use, not only an object that the sisters put on. The jilbab is not only something that the sisters put on, but it's a way of life, my dear respected brothers and sisters. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. My dear respected brothers and sisters, just as hijab is an obligation in Islam, come to understand this. That if you do not adhere to this hijab, there are consequences with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the reality of it. Oftentimes we move in this dunya like we're untouchable, when in reality Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is the reason why there's a day of judgment. This is the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to call us forward one day to ask us how we adhere to these things. And come to understand, brothers, Allah will ask you about your awrah. Allah will ask you about the things that you looked at. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of this in the Quran. يَوْمَ تَشْهَدُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَلْسِنَتُهُمْ وَأَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَرْجُلُهُمْ بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. On the day of judgment, when you come before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will take away your ability to speak. And when He takes away your ability to speak, if I could ask the brothers to move forward a little bit just to make some room for the other brothers as well too, inshallah. Allah will take away your ability to speak, He'll take away your ability to talk, and your limbs will begin to testify against you. This is the reality. Ya Allah, he didn't adhere to the awrah. Ya Allah, his eyes were looking at this, his eyes were constantly looking at that, his mouth was constantly making remarks to this, his mouth was constantly making remarks to that. Similarly for this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask you on the day of judgment, why is it that you could not adhere to this? And come to understand, my dear respected sisters, that the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim, and this is a reminder for the brothers as well, because our goal is to get to Jannah, not only for us, but for our wives, for our daughters. We all want to get to Jannah. But in order to get there, we have to study the deen and move accordingly. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when it comes to women not wearing hijab, the Prophet ﷺ said that when they come before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment, come to understand this, that if they did not practice this idea of hijab, they will not even be able to smell the fragrance of Jannah. This is a reality, my dear respected brothers and sisters. Right? So we have to come to understand this. And how do we come to understand this? By educating, not only educating, but empowering ourselves, our wives, our children, our daughters for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm going to reiterate this, hijab is not easy. Oftentimes we're so quick to judge and we're so quick to say hijab is easy, this and that, when in reality, one of the hardest things to do is to lower your gaze. We'll take it a step further for the sisters. One of the hardest things to even do, especially as you get older and you decide to take hijab on, to cover your body. And I challenge any one of the brothers to go out in a thobe in public and see how you feel. You'll feel just an ounce of what the sisters feel. But then again, we educate ourselves. This is how we empower ourselves. So my dearest, try our best to adhere to this hijab. Now, subhanAllah, there are some points where I just, for the sake of, and this is a humble reminder for the sisters, not only for the sisters, but for the brothers as well too. These are just some points that you can try to take to better your khimar, to better your jilbab, and to better your overall hijab. This is from the scholars, radiyallahu anhum. Remind yourself of who you're doing this for, first and foremost. Oftentimes when you're surrounded by brothers and you're forced to lower your gaze, it isn't there. Right? Oftentimes when you're surrounded around the brothers or you're in the right gathering, it's very easy to not adhere to these things. But come to understand, my dear respected sisters and brothers, that who you're doing first and foremost, it's ultimately for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you do things strictly for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will make it easy for you. Right? The second thing is, the scholars went on by saying, especially for the sisters who are genuinely struggling with this, because we all struggle in some aspect of the deen. Nobody's perfect. Right? The scholars went on by saying, if you genuinely struggle with this aspect, practice by wearing your hijab. Right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, هَلَكَ الْمُتَنَطَّعُونَ. Destruction will come to those people who are extreme when it comes to any aspect of the deen. So if you're struggling with it, practice wearing it maybe one time in public, right? And build up from there. Oftentimes, even when it comes to the brothers, when they wholeheartedly jump into something, they'll be extremely enthused for a couple of days and then it'll burn out. Slowly build up to it, right? The third point that they went on by saying is that oftentimes when we have this idea of jilbab, of covering the body from head to toe, it's such an idea where women need to wear black, absolutely no a sense of style when it comes to your hijab, but within modest terms and in accordance to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught you to do. Meaning, go out and buy a new wardrobe if it'll empower you to wear the hijab. The fourth point they went on by saying is, remember, you don't have to do this alone, my dear respected brothers and sisters. This is why the importance of amongst the oftentimes sisters that are like-minded, it will genuinely to lower your gaze, to not think about the things that you want to think about. And it will become easier for you to put on the hijab and adhere. The fifth point is, make sincere dua to Allah that He makes it easy for you. Oftentimes when we go out and try to lower our gaze and Shaitan makes us think that we're invincible. Not only that we're invincible, but that we can handle this world on our own. When in reality, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, nothing can be done without the permission of Allah and the strength that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So as we empower our daughters, as we empower our wives, as we empower the women of our community, as we empower the men of our community, come to understand that it needs to be backed up by dua. Make dua for, if you know your wife is struggling with it, make dua for her. If you know your daughter is struggling with it, instead of ridiculing them, abasing them, and belittle them, make dua for them and set them up for success for the sake of them adhering to this. If you're genuinely struggling with this, I know a lot of brothers that struggle with lowering their gaze, especially when it comes to their phones. It's just you and the phone. It's one-on-one. Nobody's watching. Obviously Allah's watching, but we tend to forget this. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy for you. And last but not least, the scholars went on by saying is, it all starts within the home. It all starts within the home, my dear respected brothers and sisters. We can sit here and try to be this community. And I ask Allah subhanahu, I love this community. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to unite this community and to empower us to elevate one another for the sake of goodness. Allahumma ameen. But come to understand this, my dear respected brothers. It's so easy to send your kids to Islamic school. It's so easy to send your kids to this sheikh and that sheikh. But in reality, if you are not the example at home, if you are not setting the standard at home, if you are not educating the home, if you are not leading the home, come to understand this, you're only making it difficult not only for yourself, but for your wives and your children as well too. It all starts within the home, my dear respected brothers and sisters. Make your dua and move accordingly when it comes to this idea of khimar, when it comes to this idea of jilbab, and when it comes to this idea of hijab. Ibadullah, inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد وبارك اللهم على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات اللهم اجعلنا من التوابين اللهم اجعلنا من المتطهرين اللهم اجعلنا من الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم أعز أهل غزة اللهم فرح أهل غزة اللهم انصر أهل غزة اللهم اشف مرضاهم وارحم موتاهم وتقبل شهداءهم ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وأقم الصلاة